Prologue. Listen. Quiet, hush. Do you hear it? There, down there, across the road. I think he stopped. No, there he goes again. The blacksmith's working. Magic it is as he works with pieces of steel. He creates, he builds, he mends. That which is broken apart, he puts together again. From the first glow of dawn through the busy brightness of day to the fading evening light, he goes on. All day long he toils, building, mending, making things whole again. Look, his light went out. He's done for the day. But he'll be back tomorrow. So much is broken, so much to mend. Did I tell it right, Harry? Oh, sorry, I forgot. Years and years ago. That's how he began all his stories. That's how my grandfather, Harry John Score, began all the tales he told me. And he would always end them with, "And that was years and years ago." Now, this blacksmith verse is part of one of those tales, a tale he claimed was a true story. I'm going to tell you this tale and see if you believe it. Oh, that's right. Sorry again, Harry. I forgot that, too. By the way, you might be wondering why I call my grandfather by his first name. Well, you see, I never thought to call him grandfather or grandpa or gramps or papa. When I was a child on the farm, it seemed I was always with him. Everyone else, my father, my mother, my two older brothers, were always working and had little time for me. He always had time for me, and took me along with him everywhere, taught me all sorts of things, and told me all sorts of stories of years and years ago. He became a best friend, so I just called him Harry. Now, to tell Harry's tale, I have to begin and end it with a short tale about me. You see, strangely, that rascal Time, yeah, you heard me, Time remains a devious temptress, a very clever rascal. And it seems often Time is a very mischievous rascal. She loves to play tricks. She can make things that happened years and years ago come back around. Sometimes she does it at the worst possible moment. Sometimes she does it just in the nick of time. And sometimes, just when you wish she would, she just sits back and does nothing. At all times, she has her own reasons. Reasons, I must confess, I never understood. But my wise old grandfather, he understood all too well. He's about to tell a story that would someday teach me to understand as well. You see, strangely, that rascal, Time, hooked Harry and me together. More than just grandfather and grandson, and much more than just friends. I was, years and years ago, a farmer's child. I lived on a farm on a one-lane dirt road in the middle of nowhere with my mother and father, my two older brothers, and my grandparents, Ma and Harry. Yeah, that's right, my best friend, Harry. They said I was too light for heavy work and too heavy for light work, so I stuck close to Harry and listened to all his tales of years and years ago. Sometimes he had to go and do the work I was either too light or too heavy to do, and that's when I drifted off to my magical world, a land of rolling hills, fermenting swamps, lush pastures, frog-infested ponds, and of course a woodlot, a life-giving woodlot. This enchanted land of mine was defined by wandering wagon roads, now lined by stone wall fences. I was king of it all. A kingdom of cornfields, pastures, and hayfields. My castle, the barn, as grand as the Taj Mahal. where I sat on a throne of golden bells. My kingdom, you must know, stretched from dawn to places far, far into a darkened night. For I had before me hay bales, hounds, and crazy little kittens. I flew recklessly from fields of grain and sailed ships on streams and ponds. And I wished upon a harvest moon to forever be a farmer's child. Then, on a midsummer's night, the year 1959, time, that devious so-and-so, began to play out one of her mischievous tricks on Harry and me, one that would bind us together forever. Calling me back from a deep, dream-filled sleep, she woke me with a sad and soulful song. It echoed a woeful wail through the dark, murky summer night. 'Twas the lament of an ancient steam whistle, pulled by the arm of a phantom driver, standing at the throttle of a phantom steam locomotive. You see, in those days, diesel ruled the rails of the old Waukegan Valley Road. Long gone were the noble kings of steam. Where did this soulful song come from? Was it just another dream from a child's burdened mind? Or an ancient steam titan crying its last farewell on a sad midnight run? Or to a fiery end to a scrapper's torch? Or was it born from beyond? Beyond life's realm? Did it beckon from the grave? At morning's light, I rushed to the barn to seek the answer to the mystery sound. My brothers laughed and said, "You're touched." My mother smiled and declared, "It's only a dream." My father was stern, not mad. What it could have been, he would not share. He took me aside and whispered, "Go ask Harry and see what he's got to say." Why didn't I think of that? I flew out of the barn and up to my grandfather's house. On his porch, he sat, waiting, arms folded, face contorted with concern. "I heard something in the night. They said you were dreaming or just made it up." "Well, they're all teasing, you know. Don't pay any mind. 'Twas no dream. I heard it too." He asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I said, "No, and I pray I never see one." He said, "Ghosts are not for us to fear. They're not even here to scare. They're always come about when mortals call them out. They always come around when there's lessons to be found, and they always appear when there's danger too near. There are times when our souls go astray and they need help to find their way. There are even times we need them to remind us of exactly who we are. All we have to do is pay attention. Sometimes they come as people and look as real as you and me. At times they appear as things like rivers, rocks, and mountains, coming out from nowhere in places they never were before. Sometimes they come as creatures like birds and cats and dogs. They cannot speak with words, you know, but they can lead you to the truth. There are sounds, phantom sounds, the ghosts you hear but never see. They may come to you as voices, howls, or whispers, or maybe thunder, and yes, even train whistles. You see, little man, for years I've heard this sound. It comes to me when I forget or even have the slightest doubt. My life has gone so well, I've had so many blessings. Last night I had some doubts, and that whistle blew them away. For me, I know its purpose, as I have for most of my life. For you, I have no answer. But an answer will surely come. It may show itself tomorrow or in 30 years. I only pray you find it before you need to know it. Well, by this time, my 9-year-old brain was spinning with amazement, and soon as never before, it was bubbling with excitement. This man I looked up to and trusted the most just told me that ghosts were real, and I actually heard one. He told me dozens of stories, and all I believed, but this tale about phantom steam whistles was the best yet. I begged him to tell me how all this began. Why this lonely haunt would call in the night. Most of all, I desperately needed to know why it was calling to me. Harry John Score slowly exhaled an old weary sigh and gazed from his porch and out over our beloved farm. "Come up here, little man," he said to me. "Set yourself down. It's a story, but it's one you gotta know. Now, you know about my brother, your great-uncle Will. You might have heard us talk about our cousin Charlie, but I never told you how, in 1917, he went off to the war. This is the story about him and us, the ghost whistle, and the blacksmith." Introduction. Ghost Whistle is a tale inspired by real people, real events, and a real place. The people are my grandparents, Harry and Martha Score, and some of their friends and relatives who lived through the frightening and tragic human firestorm remembered as World War I. The events are but a few of several drawn from a long series of tales from years and years ago, and told to me by my grandfather, Harry. The location is my comfortable ancestral home, the Wallkill River Valley. This tale is a tribute to a generation that endured and triumphed over the war to end all wars, the Great Depression, and the Second World War, the generation that defined who we are. It is also a personal, adoring homage to my grandfather, Harry John Score, who, like no other human being, defined who I am. Finally, Ghost Whistle is just another journey, bold and boastful. The passengers of long ago passed into history, and I am, perhaps, the only remaining soul remembering their story, a circumstance that poses an interesting question. How valid is my tale? It's a cauldron of fact and fancy, or maybe a little more of this and a little less of that. If you believe in remembrance and the spirit of those who cleared our paths, you will comprehend the Ghost Whistle, for it's simply a conversation between the past and the present, a prosaic train ride through time. Enjoy the journey. Chapter 1. Harry's Tale, Two Brothers. Years and years ago, back when I wasn't much older than you, we worked hard, played hard, and just plain lived hard. For that's how it was in a world where life was hard. Those were the days of my youth, just before they called us to go off to France and fight in Woodrows War. My brother Will and I were at the age and of the mind. We had no fear of anyone or anything. We were not afraid to grab this big old world, grab it by its giant tail and hold on for all it's worth. And for the sake of all that's holy, never, never let it go. We milked cows and pitched hay. We tried to get by on the old man's farm. It never worked as we hoped it would, so we hired ourselves out to do other things. We ended up doing everything and anything just to stay alive. We worked on the Hudson and the shipyards at Newburgh. We helped dig the ditch where the aqueduct ran. We worked as carpenters and masons when the work was there. We bought an old thrasher and hauled it about, thrashing grain from Bullville to Coldenham. The two of us played hard, harder than we worked, to be honest. Whiskey was cheap and beer cheaper every day except Sunday at the 7 Mile Inn. We played baseball, bare-handed baseball. In the back room we played poker, my favorite sport. With our winnings we chased women, painted ladies, up and down the Newburgh-Catchecton, through Rock Tavern and Burnside and back up through Little Britain. All this on a banged-up, patched-up Indian bike. with me at the throttle and Will at the sidecar. It was hard times, but good times. We managed to get through 'em, and we actually did well as I look back on it. If I could go back, not a thing I would change in the days that existed before Woodrows War. Chapter 2, Charlie, All the Luck. What's that, Harry? Oh, it was Uncle Will's bike. You say he just couldn't drive it. I always thought he was good at... Oh, I see, you were better. No, don't fret. I didn't forget. I'm going to tell about Cousin Charlie right now. Well, it seems Cousin Charlie, English Cousin Charlie, had his eyes on Ellis Island, while Woodrow, he had his eyes on France. All this in the summer of 1914. In the footsteps of his uncle, Charlie took a leap, a giant leap, across the pond, to live in the land of the free, being modest. Just a chance to live long, live well, and be free. From the start, he fit in well. He could work hard, play hard. He was another pair of ready hands and able and willing to grab that giant earth's tail, and then the three of us together, no matter what the cost, never let it go. Charlie was a lovable, likable, and most of all, a lucky man. His good nature warmed the hearts of all he touched. But most of all, we noticed a treasure he possessed, a bottomless well that never ran dry of pure, concentrated, unbelievable good luck. While Will and I could always find hard work, Charlie always found easy work. Will and I had a motorcycle. Charlie had his own car. I won at poker most of the time. Charlie won it all the time. Will and I chased women. Women chased Charlie. There were lots of good luck Charlies around. Some were true to the name. Some were phony as hell. But Charlie was a lucky, lucky man no matter what he did. To call him another good luck Charlie didn't quite fit the bill. So we did him one better. We called him Charlie All the Luck. Chapter 3, Woodrows War, Blood on the Wind. Before that summer night of the call of the ghost whistle, Harry never talked of those days, those years of the Great War, World War I, or as he called it, Woodrows War. He was never short of stories of his past, and the older I got, the more I heard about grown-up things, darker things, bad times, bad people. But he never, ever talked about that war. He never struck me as an overly religious or self-righteous man. He was certainly not a pacifist. But until that summer day in 1959, he would talk about everything up to and right after World War I. And after that day, he never talked about it again. When he talked about his brother and his cousin and the life they shared in those days, I could clearly hear the joy in his voice. It was nostalgia at its best, even though at the time I was too young to know anything about nostalgia. Then suddenly, just as storm clouds darkened the brightness of a summer afternoon, his mood darkened. For the first time, he began to talk about that war. The world went to hell in Sarajevo. The summertime began in 1914. Its heat boiled over into Luxembourg, France, and Belgium. By the time those steamy, sultry days of August came to the Hudson Highlands, we watched in dread and waited. We prayed to God that hell would stop and leave us here alone, but summer's flames grew hotter and spread across the ocean. And in 1915, the Lady Lusitania and 1,000 helpless souls were taken by those fires of summer that threatened the world. We prayed to God again and waited for his answer, but for a long, eternal year, the answer never came. And then that knuckle-headed Kaiser gave Mexico a plan. Go ahead and take back Texas. We'll stand behind you all the way. And take back Arizona, too, and New Mexico as well. Keep those Yankees busy over there and far away from us. Keep them occupied. Well, whatever the Kaiser was thinking, it never worked. The plan really made us mad. Woodrow got his answer, and not the one we wished. Hell now seemed all around us. So Woodrow took us to his war. Woodrow should have been a farmer. It might have helped if the Kaiser had been too. If they had learned a lesson most farmers knew all too well, World War I might just have been World War never. Beware the scent of blood on the wind. A warning passed down from farmer to son. A mindful precaution when walking among cows. One nervous Holstein is danger enough. A herd of such creatures, a force to avoid. We humans are often like cattle. One nervous cow or one crazy zealot stirs up a herd or ignites a world into war. And so it was in Sarajevo. One pull of a trigger, and the world went on a deadly stampede. And so it was here by the Hudson. We Yankee farm boys who should have known better sniffed the air with blood and ran with the herd. If we'd thought of the cost, we'd have chose to stay home. But the world and its madness swept us along. Charlie and I were first to sign up. Will, a bit older and certainly much wiser, decided to wait and see what would happen. He wasn't afraid, but he had things to do. If the draft called him up, he promised to go. The Army took Charlie just as he planned. The reward for his service to be part of this land. As always, my cousin lived up to his name. Charlie had all the luck. Much more than I. Uncle Sam turned me down. I was 1 inch too short. I even felt shorter, not being allowed to serve. Charlie was destined to go off to glory, and I was destined for nothing at home. But fate saw things different that summer of 1917. There's not always glory with blood on the wind. Chapter 4, The Old and Weary Line. Charlie, all the luck Charlie, forever had good luck. He always had a plan. He planned his trip across the ocean. He planned his best to be a Yank. He planned to be a soldier. Whatever Charlie planned to do, he never failed to do. Charlie knew I was disappointed, and Charlie knew my pride was broken. So Charlie planned to cheer me up. A night on the town was his solution, and not just any night or any town. 2 days later, just before the rising sun, Charlie had us on a southbound train heading for the docks at Old Weehawken. The night was Friday. The town, New York City. High above the engine stack billowed thick, dusty smoke, reeking with a sharp, acrid odor only burning coal gives. Steam valves hissing, steam pressure rising. Along with the blazing morning sun, the heat of an Orange County July joined the heat of a flaming firebox. The conductor's last call. All aboard! The fireman's nod. The engineer's hand on the whistle. The command goes forth as tons of creaking, stretching steel begin to move. Slowly, ever so slowly, the track bed groans as tons of eager, stretching steel come alive. All the couplers grab and begin to pull. Steel wheels squeak and squeal on twin rails of steel. Crossing the joints, the old tea kettle pulls away from Campbell Hall southbound to the Big Apple on the old and weary line. We rolled east to the station at Burnside. First came meadows and rolling drumlins. 3 miles of storybook pastures and fields of corn and clover are passing by like gentle waves of green and gold on a fertile sea of magic soil and not a stone in sight. Next came the maze of hills and tangled creeks, and the infernal reason Rock Tavern got its name. Rock Heaven was a better name the farmers gave it. Folks believed when all rocks died, they all went there, where for all eternity farmers labored to pick them year after year. 3 miles further east, the tracks cut under Station Road. We entered into Little Britain, where the hills quickly grew. The tracks dodged around them, and down to Denniston we ran, then south a bit to Meadowbrook, and north a bit to Firthcliffe, high above Murderer's Creek and across the bridge at Orr's Mill. Our eastward run ended at Cornwall and its expanding coal yards on the river. Then the tracks led us southward on the busy west shore line. We made a full-throttle run down along the mighty, majestic Hudson to catch the waiting New York ferries at the docks of Weehawken. Somebody once told me the joy is in the journey, and the joy I found as we flew through the farmland was watching the world I grew up in pass by in review. Once it faded out of sight, the joy was out of mind. Not for me to know again till the next morning journeys delivered me home. That night on the town skipped by in a heartbeat. It was all a blur of lights and noise and crowds, dapper men, painted ladies, reckless cabs, nervous horses, kegs of beer and endless shots of high-priced whiskey. By the morning's light, I'd had enough and just as soon be home. On the first train out, we raced back up along that proud old river. The number 228 on that old tea kettle. She ran like the devil was about to catch her, and she never stopped once till the Orr's Mill trestle. She ran like she knew how much I wanted to go home. Chapter 5. Blacksmith Joe. Once secure at Campbell Hall, instead of going north to home, Charlie took us south. He said he had to play the trotters down at Goshen's half-mile track. Charlie's luck took us southbound on the good old Erie line, and what seemed like moments later, we were chasing Charlie through the streets. I'd just as soon be back home, but thanks to Charlie, we were off to the races. Will followed Charlie off to drink and bet on horses, and I went off to sulk. In spite of Charlie's plan to cheer me up, my heart kept sinking deeper. Why did God make me so short? What a dirty trick to play. So, up in the grandstand as tall as I could go, I found a shaded seat. Not being much into trotting horses, I soon drifted off to sleep. Half a heartbeat later, I woke back up. A stranger sat beside me. A massive man, not only seen, but somehow felt. Middle-aged man, narrow in the waist, yet husky, with huge and hardened hands. A tall man with deep eyes, almost black. A thick neck and strong jaw. A majestic man, sparsely crowned with short white hair. At first, the sight of him scared me half to death, but as he spoke, I soon forgot. His mellow voice was peaceful, calm, and somehow comforting. Great day for racing, don't you think? Air is dry, breeze is slight. Perfect day for the trotters. Know anything about horses? A little, I replied. We have a team of Percherons at home. I've plowed a lot of ground with them. I call them Tom and Dick. before I could make the punchline and introduce my name, he declared with a chuckle, "Tom, Dick, and Harry make a perfect team. Good to meet you, Harry. I work with horses, too. They call me Blacksmith Joe. Tell me, son, what's your opinion of these trotting horses?" "Well, they're a far cry different from my working team," I said. "Slimmer, sleeker, faster, built for a different job. It's quite a sight to see them prance around the track, but in the field they'd break their legs the first time they caught a rock." "Good point, young fella. Winners today and front page news tomorrow. And what, pray tell, what great deed was done for them to earn it?" "They ran around this track a second faster than the losers. They made some money for their owners and a lucky dozen lucky gamblers. But when it all comes down before the Creator's eye, just what did they do?" Teams like Tom and Dick and Harry, too, have been around for ages, season after season, century after century, turning the soil. Done more for humankind than any trotter's done. Never seen them in the headlines, never praised for what they do. Never glory for the plow horse, sad to say. No glory, so it seems. It seems the road to glory, if glory is what you seek, does not always lead to headlines. It's not always front page news. Glory's glow is not always out there shining for everyone to see. Mostly find it hidden deep inside you. Glory is not something to be seen, but rather something you can feel. Blacksmith Joe turned and looked directly at me. I felt those deep, dark eyes pierce cleanly through my soul. "You'd best remember what I tell you now, son, as men go off to war. Many men will find their glory, and many men will die." He placed his hand upon my shoulder. I felt the sadness in his touch. The fate for many is to give their lives for freedom. For those who live, a different plan. For those who fight and die, there is a debt you all must pay. A covenant penned in blood on a sacred page and sealed by God. You must live for those who died for you. Live long, live well, live free. His words now somber as he spoke. A tear tumbled from his eye. "Your cousin's road leads off to war. Yours leads you to home. God doesn't measure men in inches or by bravery earned in fight. Some men are given burdens never found on battlefields. Time is coming soon. Soon you'll understand." "Hey, wake up!" The voice was now of Charlie Score. I looked up and saw his shining grin. "Come along with me, Mr. Too Short. Let's head for the barn." I turned back to say goodbye, but the blacksmith had vanished. "Why so soon?" I asked my cousin. "It's almost dark. Very dark," he said. Chapter 6. Mattie Davidson. Late in the evening, we caught a northbound Erie through Campbell Hall, back to where our adventure began 2 days before. It was to a village on the south end of the Wallkill Valley line, where the Wallkill River meanders through lush pastures, wrapping her soft, loving arms around gently rolling meadows. Once called Ward's Bridge, a village known for its applejack and sweet butter, after 1810 they called it Montgomery, after a general killed in battle. Our home was in East Coldenham, 5 miles to the east. Most of the work we found was between home and the Hudson River, and though we spent most our extra time and most our extra money at the little country bumpkin bar they called the 7 Mile Inn, it seems whenever something special happened, it always happened in Montgomery. On that sultry summer night, as I stepped down off the train at the end of our journey, Standing there before me, beneath the golden glow of an ancient village streetlight, was a heavenly apparition. Before me appeared an angel. She was by far the most enchanting, lovely lady I had ever in my life seen anywhere or any time. I wondered who she was. I stopped and held my breath when she approached and waved her hand, but her greeting was for another who was standing just behind me. When I turned to see the blessed soul who was the object of her greeting, I discovered to my surprise, my joy, and my disappointment that it was, of course, no one other than my English cousin Charlie. Cousin Charlie, all the luck Charlie. Some things seemed to stay the same. Charlie Score had many women. His conquests were legend. But on that sultry summer evening, in that year when all was changing, I saw Cousin Charlie changing too. There, beneath an ancient streetlight, I stood and watched in silence as these two lovers held each other as if they were the leading players on the final page and closing scene of a happy ending fairy tale. The lady's name was Mattie. She lived not far from me, but for one reason or another we never met until that night. In the many days that followed, I came to learn more of her and how the beauty on the outside came from somewhere deep within. I was happy for my cousin and happy for this lady too, and with a little pain of envy, I wished them all the best. We two brothers and our cousins now had a woman in our midst. It never bothered Will at all. She was just another friend, and he had several other women to keep his attention on the run. But for me, there was a problem. It started growing deep within, and deep within, I had to keep it. She belonged to Cousin Charlie. That lone fact I had to honor, for honor meant the world to me. Chapter 7. Off to War. August came quickly and Charlie had to go. Woodrow's little war would no longer wait. At Montgomery Station we gathered round our friend. I shook his hand and hugged him and bid the man farewell, and then I turned away not to witness what happened next. Brother Will looked upon it and described the sight years later. It was a tearful scene played out 1,000 times, as war demands its evil toll on those who fall in love. Two loving souls joined together at the heart, holding on to one another for a final moment. The damn whistle blew and the train began to move. Suddenly, two loving hearts were torn apart. It took me years to make my peace. That awful day in August was just about the worst. In spite of what the blacksmith told me, and what may well have been just another dream, I was still ashamed to be too short. Even worse, the mission Charlie left upon my shoulders. Once again, another plan. He planned to marry Mattie once the war was over, and I would have the honor of being his best man. And even worse than that, he left another burden. While he was off to war, I would be in charge of her well-being, that is. Such a trustful, honorable friend and cousin I had always been. That day he went off to war, another war began to rage. As the train pulled away from Montgomery Station, Mattie's face turned pale and tears began to fall. Will stood by and put his arms around her. I turned away to hide the pain I had to bear. The coming months would bring a hopeless challenge. Though honor bound, I feared I could not bear the task. Instead, I knew I was guilty of the lowly crime of falling for the lady of a soldier off to war. In a moment of weakness, anger, and confusion, I began to curse the burden. As the steam engine's whistle proclaimed its warning, my anger sank deeper. I cursed Charlie's luck. Chapter 8. Seasons of the Whistle. With September came changes. The sultry summer stepped aside. The crisp, clear air of a premature fall took her place. My muddled mind and troubled heart began to clear. Though I could not forgive my actions that morning at the station, I vowed to rise above it, to follow a path of honor. I became for Mattie the perfect friend and stifled my deeper feelings. We shared all the news and every rumor that we heard about the war. We read to each other Charlie's letters from the front. I left out any words I suspected as disturbing, and I suppose she did the same for private words of love. I even took to paying visits to her family's farm. When my help was needed, I gave myself freely. In those days, steam was king. Railroads ruled, and locomotive whistles signaled throughout each day. They signaled comings and goings, taking aways and bringing backs. They brought the season's tourists. They took our milk, cheese, and butter. They brought coal from Pennsylvania. They took our fruits and vegetables and brought inventory to the store folks. Woodrows War raged into the fall. Mail by rail was our lifeline. And again, whistles welcomed pleasant news and warned when it was bad. Those whistles took upon themselves another duty: to bring to home the news of greatest joy and glory, or to call forth the dreadful warning of a loved one's deepest sorrow. And so it was for those who stayed. Our ears sharply turned to the wailing of the whistles. Our hopes, fears, everything we lived for were governed by the echoes of every locomotive. I stood by Mattie every day as trains brought their stories. I feared for her, for Charlie's fate, and for myself as well. For matters of the heart, I kept in tight control. November passed. December brought the winter. Christmas Eve, I prayed, "Oh God, please make sense of this season." Since all that came about the crazy year before destroyed the little faith I had left in the human race, it also had me wondering if I had any faith in me. The only answer God sent back was a dream about the blacksmith. I saw his deep, dark eyes and heard his calming voice again. Remember what you know about plow horses. Remember from where the glory comes. Live long, live well, and most of all, live free. Prepare yourself for... And then another whistle blew. I failed to heed his warning. And as the darkness of war closed around us, we found light in our new union. No matter what I had wished or what was supposed to be, that lady began to consider me much more than just a friend. Chapter 9. Armistice. October always brings about the end. It brings about the frost. It ushers in the dark. Summer's green fades to brown, then gray. As the summer's southern breeze bows to the autumn's western wind, it's the last month for good pasture. It's the last chance to make hay. It's the last chance to reap what you sow. In 1918, it ended so much more. As Mother Nature rules, it ended things that needed ending. It ended things that had barely begun. It ended things that should not have ever started, and it ended things that should not have ever ended. Mother rules, and it's not for us to change the course. What used to be our simple lives seemed long ago and far away. What used to be our simple world now is torn apart by war. What man and nature brought about, we had to pay for all. October brought back Brother Will, but only till November. He was ordered overseas and to depart November 12th. Cousin Charlie's letters stopped coming altogether, and Mattie's heart was near broken. But Mattie's heart was also torn between her feelings for Cousin Charlie and me. Another card fell on the table, a way to change my future, a way to end this burden. A friend from down in Westchester found a job with healthy wages, more or less the kind of work I did. The job was mine if I should choose. I could start life over, end my pain. It was my chance to run away. November came. We felt the chill. Not another word from Charlie, but a lot about fighting. Talk about an armistice, a septic way to end a dirty war. Our hopes were lifted one last time, and then, at last, it happened. It was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Woodrows War came to an end. Will was ordered to stand down and wait till further orders. That night we celebrated as we had never celebrated before. The booze was on the house. Open bar at the 7 Mile Inn. And Mattie, not as cheerful, stayed home and waited. She had an eerie feeling. Our celebration took us eastward to Broadway, Newburgh, on our beat-up motorcycle with me, as usual, at the throttle and Will beside me in the sidecar. With war's burden off our shoulders, we exorcised the devil back to hell. We toppled over every can of garbage from Upper Broadway to the river. We made it home all right, sometime after the witching hour, sometime before the sun came up. How we managed to get home, I figure God could only say. We couldn't have been more exhausted, we couldn't have been more hungover, and never could have been more joyful. Till there came that pounding, a pounding at our door. If I could live 300 years, the mournful moment that came next would always rule my memory. In the doorway stood a trembling image, torn by grief and despair, a wailing, cracking, woeful voice with the tragic, tearful face of Mattie. She could not speak. There was no need. For instead, a downcast, distant, sad steam whistle spoke to me what she could not. It came to pass that Cousin Charlie's luck ran out. Chapter 10, Running Away. The war was over, and oh, the cost. Charlie's score was gone forever. Mattie was a burned-out shell, and I was guilty of grave dishonor. I bore the shame of falling for a fallen soldier's love. What little honor I had left, what little courage remained, I used to help her bear the pain. Too little penance, too large a crime. I was at Montgomery Station the day they brought back Charlie's duffel. I was there and stood with Mattie and held her when the whistle blew. And every time I've heard a whistle since, I remember how I cursed my cousin's luck. Our family and friends all came together to honor Charlie and say goodbye. And when the last note of tap sounded from that bugle, I packed my bags and ran away. For the next 3 years, I lived in exile down in Bedford Hills on a large estate. I became a great groundskeeper, a carpenter, a plumber, and a chauffeur, too. Whatever the owners wanted from me, I gave it all and asked no questions. Life was peaceful. Life was calm. Life was incomplete, and life was empty. All I had to care for was me. Brother Will stayed on at home. Someone had to milk the cows. He kept me up on all the news and who did what and who went where. He told me Mattie went away to study nursing up in Albany. Before she left, she asked if I was well and wished me all the best, but not another word since then. I could not pass a single day and not think about that lady. But I could not pass a single day and not forget my crime. I was content in exile. I didn't have to feel the pain. And as long as I kept busy, it was very easy to pretend I was not in love with Mattie. Chapter 11. Running Home. It was late in the evening on the 27th day of April in the year of 22. It began like many other nights. I sat there at the bar in a tavern down in Bedford. I tried to fill my empty life with another glass of beer. He came in and sat beside me on the vacant stool to my right. Though it was several years before, he looked just as I remembered when I saw him for the first time at the racetrack in Goshen. This time I was wide awake, and so far I only had one beer. So it was not imagination and by no means a dream. Whoever this old blacksmith was, I now was certain he was real. Just in case it was a dream, I introduced him to the barmaid, and sure enough, he shook her hand. If he was in fact a ghost, he was very good at it. "Well, how you doing, Harry? Looks just like the good old days when you had the planet by the tail." If this was meant as humor, I wasn't in the mood. I turned and looked straight at him. A bit annoyed, I asked him, "Just what in hell is it that you want from me? I remember what you said about a covenant, about that debt the living owe, and about that glory deep inside that's not for all to see. Well, even I can't see that glory and that damn debt you say I owe. I won't live long enough to pay. Listen to me very carefully." His voice was calming, yet commanding. "You have a lot of pain to bear, and you have a lot of sorrow. But falling in love is not a crime, and to follow your heart is not a shame. Charlie's path was chosen long ago, and yours was chosen too, and it was written in the stars that Mattie is to be with you. Go home and honor Charlie. This is how you'll do it. Go home, pick up the pieces of the life he left behind. He had to go to war. You had to stay home. He died for you, so live for him. Go home. Go back to Mattie. Go home to her. Live long, live well, live free." The next morning I was on a train, heading northbound, running home. After hearing what the blacksmith had to say made me wonder why in hell I ran away. But what of Mattie after all this time? I left her alone in a world of pain. Was I going home to something no longer there? And what about this phantom blacksmith? Was he as real as he seemed to be? Was he a ghost or something much more evil? Was he a part of a vengeful plan to pay me back for my foolish ways? But if all he said was true, where and how would I begin my search for Mattie? All of these questions were answered when the train returned me to the station in Montgomery. On that attractive April morning, I stepped down off the train to end my journey. Standing there before me beneath the golden glow of the early morning sunlight was a heavenly apparition that appeared to me an angel, She was by far the most enchanting, lovely lady I had ever seen in my life, anywhere or any time. It was Mattie standing there, and she was waiting for me. Chapter 12. Rejoice. We were married in Montgomery, in the little church just up the street from the station where we met. We danced the night away down around the corner at the Palace Hotel. And because it was Montgomery, something else was bound to happen, and sure enough, it did. There inside the ballroom, on the wall behind the bar, hung an ancient portrait of a blacksmith, the very same man who spoke to me. And it drew a frightened gasp from Mattie, for she had met him too. A patient she had cared for looked exactly like this man. He asked her why such a lovely lady was so young, so sad, and so alone. That was when a conversation started, one where she decided to go back home. The old man working at the bar appeared as old as the painting above, so we asked him if he could tell us who this phantom blacksmith really was. We told him of our story, how we had been torn apart, and how this man had brought us back together. The old man turned around and looked up at the image. He rubbed his balding head and then looked back at us. With a puzzled look and one eye squinted, he asked, "How much have you two been drinking?" "The man you see was Grandpa Joe. He died in 1863. By trade, he was a blacksmith. His shop still stands across the street. But by heart, he was an abolitionist, so when the war broke out, he had to go. He held strong belief that freedom wasn't free and no man was free until we all were free. And to own that freedom was a debt we all must pay. He was a bit too old to stand in battle, so the army had him care for horses. Though his service kept him from the front, a rebel cannon found him anyway. And now he's somewhere in the ground at Gettysburg. I don't doubt you both saw a man who looked a lot like him, but he's been gone for 60 years. Now there is something that you said that does seem rather strange. I was just a boy when I last saw the man, but there is something I remember, something he used to say when people brought him work. He had a little poem. Bring me your broken metal. Though it be a broken tool, though it be a broken kettle, I can mend it back together, anything you break apart. And if you should have the need, I can even mend a broken heart. The old man scratched his head again and squinted with his other eye. As you can see, I've lived a long, long time. I've done a lot, I've seen a lot. But if what you say is really true, I guess I've seen it all. With that, the old man placed before us 3 tall glasses and filled them all with wine. He offered a toast to Blacksmith Joe. I have no doubt you tell the truth, so here's to Grandpa Joe. Though his shop be silent, his tools forever still, his forge burns on above the great beyond, where now he's mending broken hearts. May God bless his soul, and these 2 souls he brought back together. Well, that settled everything. The man we saw and the man in the portrait were the same. And to this very day, I have no doubt that what I saw and heard was real. But the story doesn't finish here. There's still the reason for the whistle. For years I didn't notice, since steam still pulled the trains. But just a few short years ago, when diesels got the job and steam locomotives vanished, I still could hear their whistles. To this day, I still can hear them. When I think back and feel the sadness of the time I cursed another's luck, and when I feel unworthy of all the glory God has blessed me. I believe that God and Charlie and all those men and women who fought and died for freedom are the steam behind those whistles. They echo throughout our cherished land to remind us what we owe. We must live for those who perished and rejoice in what they gave. And as one among them said to me, live long and well, and most of all, live free. Epilogue. 'Twas the first time I remember my grandfather shedding tears. 'Twas the first and only time he did not end a story with years and years ago. It was a long and drawn-out explanation of why he heard the whistle, but after all that I was told, he never gave an answer of why the whistle blew for me. Of course, at first he warned it could take several years, but one day I would understand why the sound had called to me. Well, in just a few years, 1967, the beginning of September, the beginning of my senior year in high school, I too saw a heavenly apparition. She appeared to me an angel. She was attractive, alluring, seductively appealing. She was the most enchanting woman I'd ever seen. But time, that devious temptress, was at it again. The hours became days, the days weeks. We connected, and I learned she was in love. In love with a soldier in Vietnam. I felt the pain of countless legend. But I too believed in honor. I remained just a friend. And then it happened. November arrived. The season changed. While the winds of November moaned, they wept with grief and resurrected the call of that old ghost whistle. And in the tragic days that followed, I finally understood. And that was years and years ago.